France is famous for food, fashion, and when it comes to the winter months, skiing.
Well, France is considered one of the top destinations in the world when it comes to winter sports, les sports d'hiver, and it's a significant part of the country's tourism industry.
Ski culture, though, is about much more than the slopes, and this being France, a lot of that has to do with food.
But has skiing gotten too expensive, and how can resorts cope with climate change?
Join us as we slalom through the ins and outs of French skiing. With its pristine alpine landscapes and dramatic mountain peaks, France is a skier's paradise, and it has been since the early 1900s when the very first ski resort was created.
These days, there are about 350 ski resorts in France. Famous places like Courchevel, Val d'Isère, Tignes, Chamonix in the Alps, but you can also ski in the Pyrenees and on the island of Corsica. There are even some places you can ski in the summer.
Winter sports are definitely part of the French psyche. For example, they get a lot of coverage on the national news.
They're stories about mountain conditions. Too much snow, not enough snow, avalanches. Some channels even have a ski weather update during the winter.
Ski culture definitely gets a lot of attention, but the truth of the matter is it really only concerns a privileged few. Less than 10% of all French people actually get to hit the slopes every year.
That's because it's expensive. You have to pay for accommodation, equipment, a ski pass. It adds up really fast.
A ski trip to the French mountains, a much-needed breath of fresh air for the whole family that can quickly turn into a financial black hole. That's because zipping down the slopes comes at a dizzying price. Tourism professionals say a week of winter sports costs on average 1,000 euros per person. For a family of 4, that's roughly the equivalent of 3 months of the minimum wage. Many French people say it's just too expensive.
Je suis jamais allé au sport d'hiver. Donc effectivement, c'est quand même très cher.
C'est quand même un sacré investissement quand même pour quelques jours. Donc ouais, il faut mettre de côté, il faut bien travailler.
Bah c'est trop cher, ils exagèrent un peu trop, mais bon, voilà, c'est comme ça. Hein.
Get ready to dish out. Transport and accommodation will account for the main chunk of your budget, but there are other costs that are hard to slalom around. Renting ski gear, buying a pass to get up the mountain, and feeding yourself. Prices for just about anything tend to be steeper in ski resorts, and it can burn a serious hole in your pocket. Some have gone so far as to call skiing a rich person's sport, but this doesn't stain the enchantment of the pristine mountains.
Petit ski le matin, petit snow l'après-midi, ça finit par une luge avec tout le monde et un plat bien chaud, genre une raclette ou une fondue, un truc bien gras. Voilà, ce serait ça, hein, avec du monde, la famille et surtout les amis.
C'est vrai que c'est magique, ce blanc, le froid. Non, on a de la chance en France hein, d'avoir tout ça.
Prices vary widely according to where you go skiing. So if you want to keep costs low, head for smaller resorts that won't cost you an arm and a leg.
Despite the high price tag, winter sports are really big business, except of course when there's a global pandemic on. And that's due in large part to foreign tourists. In fact, you almost always hear foreign languages spoken on French ski slopes.
Foreigners represent about 25% of the 10 million people who visit French ski resorts each winter. Winter sports, meanwhile, account for about 10% of the French tourism industry, which is quite a lot.
For many people here, the ski industry is known as white gold, and a lot of people depend on it.
More than 120,000 jobs are created in French ski resorts each winter. A lot of this during the school holiday that takes place during the winter, les vacances d'hiver.
From grade school to high school, French kids get 2 weeks vacation every 6 weeks, and that includes 2 weeks in February and March. And for those families who can afford it, that often means an annual pilgrimage up to the mountains.
Now, fortunately, French school holidays are divided into 3 geographical zones, so it means that not everyone is on the slopes at the same time.
And during that winter break, many kids turn in their textbooks for lessons of another kind.
If you've been skiing in France, you've definitely noticed them. They're suntanned, dressed in trademark red ski suits, and often followed by a line of more or less confident students. These are instructors for the ESF, the École du Ski Français, French ski school, an institution in France. The ESF's 17,000 instructors will teach you how to cross-country ski, downhill ski, snowboard, or otherwise gracefully get down the mountain. For kids age 2 and up, a whole codified system of levels exists, much like grades in school. It starts with Piou Piou, then Ourson Cub, Flocon Snowflake, and then there are the stars, première étoile, deuxième étoile, troisième étoile, étoile de bronze, bronze star, and finally étoile d'or, gold star. At the end of a week of lessons, you pass an exam, and if you succeed, you get a little medal. As for the slopes, they're color-coded into 4 levels of difficulty. Green, flat and wide slopes for beginners, blue, a little steeper, red, steeper, narrower, and bumpier, and finally black, for confirmed, confident skiers, daredevils, speed addicts, and thrill seekers. Bon ski!
One major part of the French ski experience is the food, which is really no surprise, this being France after all.
Well, it does help you get down the slope a lot faster, that's for sure. But what's funny is a lot of these traditional French ski dishes actually originated in Switzerland. But over the years, I guess you could say they were somewhat improved in France. But one thing's for sure, a lot of them involve delicious cheese.
Ski favorites include raclette, where you scrape cheese off onto potatoes, or sliced deli meat that's known here as charcuterie. There's also tartiflette, which is potatoes, onions, and cheese baked in the oven. And of course, the ever-present fondue.
The delicious liquid heaven that is fondue. What could go wrong when you mix melted cheese and wine?
A trip to the French mountains is quite a luxury, so if you can't make it, we thought we'd bring the mountains to you with fondue.
Fondue literally means melted, and that's essentially what it is, melted heaven.
There are different kinds of fondue. There's chocolate fondue, fondue bourguignon, which is raw beef that's cooked in hot flavored oil. But today we're going to show you how to make cheese fondue.
Cheese fondue is surprisingly easy to make, and there are different types depending on the combination of cheeses that you use. There's the fondue suisse, the fondue jurassienne, but today we're going to teach you the classic, which is the fondue savoyard, and it comes from the Savoie region of France in the Northern Alps.
So to make a fondue savoyard for 4 people, you need 20 centiliters of dry white wine, 300 grams of Comté cheese, 300 grams of Beaufort cheese, 100 grams of Emmental cheese, nutmeg, cornstarch, pepper, and a clove of garlic.
Fondue is traditionally made in a clay pot known as a queclon. Here's a handy electric one, but you can also just use a normal pot. First step, dice up the cheese.
Next, take the garlic, rub it around the pot, and leave it there. Pour 15 centiliters of the white wine and then heat it up.
The trick is not to cook it too hot because all the alcohol will evaporate, and that's where a lot of the flavor is. In a small bowl, mix the remaining wine with a teaspoon of cornstarch and a teaspoon of nutmeg and leave it to the side.
When the wine starts to simmer, add in the cheese little by little on low to medium heat. Pro tip, never stop stirring with a wooden spoon. You want the cheeses to blend together and not be clumpy.
Yeah, it's kind of clumpy.
It's getting there.
It's getting there. Locals will tell you that to make a delicious and smooth fondue, you need to stir it in a figure 8.
That's what I wasn't doing. Let me try.
Once the cheese is all melted together, mix in the remaining wine, nutmeg, and cornstarch mix. Now, if you want to spice it up a little bit, you can add a shot of cherry liqueur like kirsch.
Oh, it's starting to smell so good. All right, if you haven't done it yet at this point, you need to chop up some bread, maybe baguette, into small cubes. That's what you're going to dip into the fondue.
You can also boil some little potatoes to eat with your fondue savoyard, and traditionally you drink white wine from the Savoie region, which is where many of these cheeses come from as well, and definitely make a green salad to help it all go down.
All right, time to dig in.
Now you have to be really careful not to lose your piece of bread in the fondue, because if you do, you get a dare. And in some families, that can mean running around in the snow naked.
Now, if you're really hardcore, when you've finished all the fondue, you can crack an egg into the bottom of the pot and soak up all of the cheesy oil that's inside.
You have to be careful with fondue. It can be a little dangerous because it continues to expand in your stomach once you've finished eating it. So it's best to quit while you're ahead. You'll thank me later. Oh, Genie!
I'm not running around naked in the snow.
Oh, this time.
Bon appetit. Many of you had questions about French winter sports, like El Diablo, who wanted to know about climate change and just how many artificial snow machines are actually used in the mountains now.
Resorts started using artificial snow machines in the 1970s to make up for unfavorable conditions. Since then, their use has increased exponentially, so it's hard to give an exact number. These days, they're used to alleviate the effects of climate change. Winters are shorter and warmer, glaciers are melting, and all this has an impact on resorts, especially low-altitude resorts. Many have been forced to diversify to avoid disappearing altogether.
Those resorts are inventing new ways to attract tourists with things like bobsledding or snowshoeing. There's another question now from Jim Carper, who says, I remember skier Jean-Claude Killy from the 1968 Olympics. Is he still beloved by the French?
Jean-Claude Killy certainly still is a household name. In fact, Tignes, the ski resort, named part of their ski area after him. But if you really want to immerse yourself into French ski culture but can't get to the mountains, I recommend watching the classic French film Les Bronzés font du ski. It's a film from 1979, but it's still a film that people quote, especially if you go skiing with French people, perhaps a little bit too much.
A lot too much. Thanks so much for watching French Connections Plus. That wraps it up for this edition. Don't forget, if you have your own questions for Flo about anything France or the French, you can always tweet her at Villeminot or reach out on Facebook.
And we'll see you soon for another episode of French Connections Plus.
Versailles, Mont-Saint-Michel, the Louvre are well-known stars of French heritage. But French genius, Anne France, harbors many other hidden treasures. The arts, gastronomy, architecture, as well as nature's wonders. Come along with France 24, discover France's living heritage. From young apprentices to accomplished craftsmen and farmers, to Michelin star sporting chefs, meet these people whose passion for their professions preserve and drive French heritage.
You are here on France 24 and France24.com.